Good afternoon. Happy Friday, April 12th. I want to talk about a couple things today. So I want to just give a little bit of a summary on the live Q&A that we hosted on Monday. If you caught that, that's fantastic. So that's on rezoning. I want to talk also about Bill 18, so municipal, provincial, federal politics, and sort of the relation between those things. And spoiler alert, probably seen it, not a big fan. But I want to break down why. I really want to get to the heart of like why it's not, and recognizing like that's a lot to break down in 15 minutes. But I just want to give a couple really concrete examples of some of the challenges that it poses to municipalities, some of the challenges that we're already facing, and why it's deeply frustrating. And I think for me, it just feels actually deeply disrespectful. And so I want to talk about that. So rezoning Q&A. Actually, first I'm going to do a thing. I started a thing last week where I've shared a little bit about myself. So it's like, hi, who's Courtney the person outside of work? And so just wanted to let you know there. So one of the things that I really like to do when I'm not working, or sometimes when I'm thinking about work too, because they often end up being intertwined, about walking the dog, cleaning the house, just putzing away at things. I am a big podcast fan. So I like to listen to podcasts, and I particularly like to listen to podcasts that are like usually a conversation between two people, but really talk about interaction and human behavior, politics, talking across the divide, people's lived experiences. So I'm currently digging into a series. There's a 4-part series that Brene Brown has put out, especially with respect to digital media. So that could be social media, any digital media, AI, and how that is changing how we behave and interact as humans. So both the positives and the negatives, and the things that we need to think about ethically. So I'm pretty sure Brene Brown has it on both of her podcasts. I just listened to the one yesterday that talked about AI and AI algorithms and how they're not actually bias proof. And so we're really, really interesting to, especially as we think about using AI to program and think about how we serve citizens, especially on that front line serving citizens. So that was really fantastic. I'm super interested in how tech intersects with city services, because of course we know that we're down that road and down that pathway, but we have to be really thoughtful and mindful of it. We know it's coming, and so we have to be able to make good information and good decision about it. So very much interested in how, the intersection of tech and civic services. So I listen a lot around that. So that's a little bit about me. I'll post a link to the one I'm talking about on all of the streams, so that you can hear it too. It is a bit of a longer one. It's over an hour, but it is really, really worthwhile, I think, and a really, really great listen. So that's a bit about me, podcast fan. So I'll put a link to a couple of my favorite podcasts, and particularly that episode. Q&A. So on Monday, I hosted a Q&A with 2 members of administration. So we fielded questions from the public ahead of time on rezoning. So some of the FAQs, the frequently asked questions that were coming in and concerns. So we covered things like the Heritage Local Area Plan. We covered utilities. We covered sort of like what is what. So what is being proposed? What is rezoning? What does RCG mean? How many bins would go on a lot? What is the process to make things happen? What is the process change that would happen? And we covered a lot of that. We talked about what is the role of community associations in all of this. So we covered a lot. We talked for an hour. And so across all the platforms, so Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, you can watch back on any of those to see what questions got answered. The Rezoning for Housing website also just got an update with some more information. So again, a lot of answers to the FAQs, some more data and metrics that people were asking for. So the Rezoning for Housing website also just got an update, which is really great for you to continue to go research and get information. I want to touch base on the very real fact that this is a challenging conversation to have. And I spoke a little bit about it on Monday towards the end, and I just want to touch on it now. We are having a conversation where we are having to measure and balance and evaluate both facts and feelings. Those are the most difficult conversations to have. Those are the most difficult conversations to evaluate, because there can be multiple truths happening at the same time. And so I am doing my best to hold space for sometimes what is sort of being said behind the concerns, while also understanding that also then like there's technical concerns versus emotional concerns, and both of those things are sitting there and being true about what people are bringing forward. And ultimately, I will always say this: Calgarians love where they live. They love their neighborhoods. They love their communities. We are people. I feel like we are a people-focused city, which means we want to be in service and of service to each other, which is what makes this conversation very, very difficult, because people have been in and of service to each other in their neighborhoods for a very, very long time. And it is a hard future to both physically conceptualize, but also emotionally conceptualize. And so we are talking about things from a facts and figure standpoint, also not always from the feelings standpoint. And so I want to recognize and hold true for people that it's okay to not like this. It's okay. And that's okay. And I'm not going to put a label on you. And I don't think we should be putting labels on each other for their feelings about this, on either way, because those are their truths, right? And people aren't, on any side of this argument without multiple truths happening and frames of reference. And if we don't always get to the heart of people's backstories, and what truths they're coming to and what their lived experiences are coming to this conversation, then we're very quick to judge. And so I'm trying to hold space. And when I hear anything from people, to try to be like, why might they be saying that? Why might they be sharing this with me? And it takes a little bit more work and a little bit more time in reading through the emails and reading through the conversations. But it is the space that we have to hold for each other in this conversation. So that's really important. And something I'm trying to do and will do through the week of the 22nd. And I hope to be curious and open-minded and ask some deep questions of people. And I recognize there are people who are just, and you can be against this for any reason. And I think this is one of the things I'm seeing is people are against this, and they're sometimes feeling like they have to give a reason against it, and a technical reason. They have to counter the fact with the fact. And you actually don't. You don't need to. If you just don't want this in your neighborhood for any reason, if you just don't want it, it's okay to just not want it. It's okay to just even send an email that says, I don't want this. That's okay. You don't have to give me a reason. You don't have to talk about utilities. You don't have to talk about height. You don't have to talk about garbage bins. You don't have to talk about anything. You can just say you don't want it. Simultaneously, you also, if you want this, you don't have to give me a reason. You can just say, yes, I support this. So we don't always need the nuance. The nuance helps the conversation from time to time, but it's also just okay to say you don't want something. It's not for you. It's one of the things I say to my kids, like, if they don't like a food, they can just be like, no, thanks. That's okay. I don't always need a reason on why they want or like a food. I mean, you just might not like the color green one day, right? That's okay. So I want to create space for that, and that this doesn't have to be a dividing conversation. It is getting pitched as a dividing conversation about you either for or you're against. There's a lot of people who understand it technically, factually, they understand it. Emotionally, they still don't want it. That's okay too. We have to figure out how to walk this conversation, this narrative together. We have to figure out how to do this, and we have to do it while holding space for each other's positions. And that is the hardest thing to do. So this is me trying to hold space for everybody in this conversation. And please know that that's not an easy thing to do. And this is not an easy decision that we are undertaking. And no one is taking it lightly, that we are truly evaluating all things. And it is different. It is difficult. It is difficult, and it is unlike many of the conversations that we've had, and that we probably will have in a very, very long time. This is, and can be potentially change-making in our city, both good and bad. Both things can be true. Both things can be true. So we have to hold space for that. I want to talk about the city-province relationship and with respect to Bill 18. So I mentioned at the outside of this, I am deeply disappointed I feel like it is really, really disrespectful. I think that cities are getting caught in the crossfire. And I want to say this is not just a Calgary issue. This is a province-wide issue. All municipalities are frustrated at this. Alberta municipalities, who is sort of our pan city, pan province association. We got a report about this at Intergovernmental Affairs on Thursday, right before the announcement. This is not good for cities at all. Definitely some of the impacts happen to some of the like mid to large size municipalities a bit more, but it impacts our small municipalities too. We are talking about infrastructure for things like rinks and pools and like sporting centers in some of our smaller, like mid and smaller municipalities that are funded out of federal dollars, or like both federal, provincial, and municipal dollars. We are talking at a big city level, or mid to big city level, we're talking about transit. I'm going to dig into that one a little bit. We're talking about housing. Housing is not just a Calgary issue. Housing is a province-wide issue. I talked to my colleagues across this province. Housing is a big issue. There are federal dollars that have been announced, not just for Calgary, but like for many of our mid-sized cities as well. This is a problem. It is a problem in many ways because housing isn't just the jurisdiction of the province or the feds or a city. It's a tripartite relationship. Organizations have to get on board and work together. This isn't working together. So let's talk about how some of these things come to be, how some of these agreements get opened up, because that might help understand sort of why it's so challenging for cities to get this news. So I'm going to rewind a little bit and talk about our municipal fiscal gap. So this is a report that came out last year that talks about the annual $311 municipal fiscal gap as a result of the province either downloading costs or not taking on the cost of things that are their responsibility. I'll use a really concrete example of this. There are many examples, but this is just one of them. Our fire department goes to a number of medical calls. Of course, with a rise in the drug poisoning crisis and the overdose epidemic that is happening citywide, not just downtown, this is not just a homeless person problem. The opioid crisis is hitting all demographics, all ages, all socioeconomic statuses. It is happening citywide. We do not get fully reimbursed for going to those medical calls and saving lives. So another decision that the fire department has had to make, so they used to administer nasal naloxone. So that was like a shot up the nose. It's a little bit more expensive to formulate, to store, all of those things. The province was only reimbursing them a percentage of that cost, so not the full cost. And so the fire department moved to intramuscular. So that's where you give someone a needle of naloxone instead, because then that cost would be fully recovered. It's as effective once in the body, but it takes longer to administer. There's just a few more steps in the process because the needles aren't pre-drawn. If you don't carry naloxone, I encourage you to carry naloxone. But those are just small things, right? Where the downloading of costs or not doing cost recovery for municipalities, it's $311 million a year that the province is not funding, that are their responsibilities that we are then funding. So if we didn't have to pay the $311 million, that is a tax break for you, Calgarians. If you want municipal taxes to be lower, talk to your provincial counterparts. Okay. Alberta municipalities put out a report about provincial dollars coming that they collect through property tax. So 30% of your tax bill is municipal education tax. The gap province-wide is $900 million that is not coming back to municipalities for infrastructure. $900 million across the province that the province is taking and not returning to municipalities. So it's not even like they're taking some portion from Calgary and reallocating it to some smaller spots to make sure that the education systems stay whole there and other infrastructure stays whole there. It's not happening. They're just taking the money. Where they're spending it, I don't know, because they can't tell us. One of the other things the province is really notorious at doing is when we do get federal transfers to the province to then trickle down into municipalities, the province counts that as provincial contribution. They don't talk about it as federal contribution. They talk about it as provincial contribution. So you really have to dig into the numbers. When they start throwing around numbers and they talk about what they're contributing back into Albertans for Albertans, a lot of that is federal. A lot of that is federal transfer dollars. So when They cry that we're not getting enough from the feds. Track the money. Look where it's coming from. So that's a whole other beef. You cannot say that we're being ignored when the feds are trying to give money directly to municipalities. So why are the feds directly trying to give money to municipalities? That's a great question. One, it's part of their priority and their jurisdiction to do that. So I'm going to use a couple examples. So housing, multi-jurisdictional, right? So they have put forward housing programs that municipalities could or could not. You had to opt into this. You had to write a program for them. You had to tell them how you were going to use your money, and you submitted an application, and based on your application and based on the criteria, they would give you X number of dollars of federal funding. So there's direct federal funding in that way. Transportation, especially transit, is a big one for that. So I think of Green Line, I think of Blue Line extension. I think if we're going to do a Red Line extension, if we're going to do any rail projects, any Calgary to Banff rail, absolutely the province is going to be involved in that. Or sorry, the province will be involved in that, but the federal government would be involved in that. Sometimes that's funding and borrowing and loans through the Canada Infrastructure Bank because they will give us lower interest rates than the province will give us. So the province has just increased the interest rate on cities. So that's one thing. But let's talk about transit. And so I'm going to use something like gas tax. So if you drive, you pay gas tax. That gas tax is federal. So that gas tax is specifically designed to fund transit infrastructure across the country. The province, so in Alberta, we do not have a provincial transportation, like provincial transit. We don't have that. Red Deer has transit, and Edmonton has transit, and Calgary has transit. So if it's going to go back to transit projects, then that money is going to flow directly to municipalities who have transit. So whether it's the TTC in Toronto, whether it's SkyTrain out in Vancouver, it's going to go to regions because that's how that program is designed. And so if we put in a step where that money has to be approved by the province, who has no authority over transit, because the transit authority is solely a city responsibility. Why are they getting in our business? Why are they getting in our business? So that is one. So let's talk about income tax. So probably the biggest transfer dollars that can come out of the federal government right now are for housing. So we all pay, federal income tax. And that income tax, in theory, should come back. Right now, the feds have decided that they are going to prioritize housing, which is why they've created housing initiatives, which is why cities can apply to that. So I was listening to Alberta at Noon yesterday, so you can go back and listen to Judy Aldis. It's a great conversation. One of the gentleman callers called in, not good information. He's a little wrong, but she talked with a gentleman from Quebec. And it was so great to hear that perspective because, of course, Quebec has this sort of mid-step where the province has to approve, right, the federal dollars that are coming through municipalities. And he absolutely said that money is slower and there's less, which means that projects take way longer to build if they're ever going to get built at all, because I can tell you that they're trying to get dollars out the door. So I don't know how Bill 18 is going to be successful, especially if it's not going to get any more resources, which is what the minister and the premier indicated. No more resources. So within the current workload of the government, they are going to review and approve federal funding coming through to the cities. So this would be, Quebec has had it for years. They likely have it resourced. They know we are not adding any more resources to this. At some point, we're going to miss deadlines. So does that also now mean that as a city, that if we're going to apply for federal dollars, the province has to review our application first and they have to agree with our application? So are they going to review it on that side too? How much sooner do we have to get things in? How long is that approval going to take? Are we even going to be able to hit deadlines? I don't know. There are so many unknowns in this and so many extra steps that don't create better services and outcomes for Albertans. So from a policy perspective, from a procedures perspective, this is red tape, and I hate using red tape, but it's just bureaucracy, and it is just a step for the sake of a step. It doesn't help Albertans. There's no evidence to say this is going to improve the lives of Albertans. This is no evidence to say that this is going to improve the lives of Calgarians by them reviewing these contracts. And they talked about provincial priorities. Well, I know what my local priorities are as a local government. So, what about local priorities? Because the province wide priorities and local priorities can be different. So, I think of jurisdictions like Okotoks to the south. They have different challenges with water, right? So they have different climate and environment challenges than we have in Calgary, and we're so close, but because our water sources are different, um, it's it boggles my mind how they're even going to understand the like the jurisdictional nuances to this, that we have expertise in, that we pay people to have expertise, and that we pay people to help us write these applications, because they know us inherently, and then to expect that the staff up in Edmonton have any of that same context and knowledge to be able to review any of this is, I just don't know. And if they're going to add more people, to what cost, to what end? That's just extra cost for the sake of adding costs. And now you have a bloated government structure at the provincial level. So I'm baffled. I'm baffled because this feels like picking a fight for the sake of picking a fight. And I am really not looking to pick a fight with the provincial government. I'm really looking to understand how this makes any sense, any way, shape, or form, based on so many of the things that they have said. Moving at the speed of business, reducing red tape, improving the lives of Albertans, getting more money from the feds, how this meets any of those other priorities that they have talked about. It seems antithesis to that. And I think it really gets in the way of local autonomy, and the services and the infrastructure that we can deliver to Calgarians when they need it and when they need it. I'll say one last thing. I have tried to get meetings with ministers about the most benign things. Hey, different upgrades are happening. Can we just have a meeting to coordinate communications, resources, make sure everybody is on the same page? This is great. I don't disagree with the project. Can we talk? How can we work together? Radio silence. Hey, you want to come be part of this event? Nope, won't do that. So I'm struggling. I'm struggling to stay quiet. I'm struggling to try to pretend like I am wanting to work with this government, that I'm open-minded, that I'm willing to set aside party politics and partisan politics and any perceived ideology about where I might be on the political spectrum, and say, hey, what is best for Calgarians right now? Let's have a conversation about it. The door has been opened, the hand has been extended, and there has been nothing in return. I'm frustrated, so I'm just saying I probably can't stay quiet much longer, because I'm truly advocating for you to get the things that we need in the city to grow and build and stay a really relevant city as we compete in a global economy, because that's where we're at. We are competing in a global economy right now, and we need every dollar from anyone who will give it to us, and we need it quickly. That's all, friends. Have a great Friday.